The royal executioner's blade had ended 23 lives without hesitation, until the night Prince Julian Radcliffe ordered him to guard the American bride he planned to destroy. Cole Harrington watched the prince humiliate Eliza Merriweather in front of 300 witnesses, forcing her to kneel at his feet like a dog. And in that moment, the Crown's most feared killer made a choice that would damn them both. He seized her hand, pulled her upright, and declared treason in front of the entire court, because some cages deserve to be burned down, even if it means burning with them. If you're ready to enjoy this story, click that subscribe button like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. The golden light of the late afternoon sun, heavy and deceptively soft, bled across the manicured lawns of Ashworth Manor. The English countryside estate, ancient and formidable, was the current cage of Eliza Merriweather, and her gown, pale pink silk trimmed in sun-yellow ribbon, was a beautiful, costly restraint. London, 1799. Eliza was the image of the perfect American bride-to-be, poised and graceful, fulfilling the political duty set before her by her influential family. She walked the perimeter of the rose garden, the hem of her dress brushing the perfect grass, the grand facade of the manor looming behind her. She counted in low, measured breaths. 3 days more, and my duty will be done. The impending marriage to Prince Julian Radcliffe was a cornerstone alliance, securing immense influence for her family and crucial foreign support for the crown. It was everything she had been raised to achieve. The final, perfect step in a life dictated by decorum and political necessity. Yet, the tranquility of the setting was a lie, a thin veneer of civility over a terrible bargain. Her careful composure shattered, not by a tremor of internal doubt, but by the movement of a shadow near the mansion's massive front door. A figure emerged, cutting a stark line against the warm stones of the house. He was tall, his silhouette defined by unnatural stillness, dressed in the dark, severe clothes of the royal court. This was no common guard. This was Cole Harrington, the man known across the realm only by his title, the Royal Executioner. Cole was a legend whispered in taverns and nursery rhymes, a man who served the crown's justice with ruthless, principled efficiency. He was the final, feared word in an unjust kingdom. And now, he was her guard. His arrival was a silent, potent declaration that duty and death were often two sides of the same royal coin. His presence meant the stakes were higher than political alliance. They were terminal. Eliza felt the air thicken, stealing the breath from her lungs. She froze, clutching the small bouquet of white roses until the stems strained. Julian's reasons for appointing the executioner as her personal escort were clear: to send an unequivocal message to her family, and to her that the crown's claim was absolute and non-negotiable. Cole Harrington moved with a disciplined grace that belied his fearsome profession. His dark hair was pulled back severely, highlighting the intense, stern lines of his face. His eyes, dark and heavy-lidded, swept across the grounds but rested briefly and piercingly on Eliza. There was no lust or admiration in his gaze, only a formidable, unreadable observation. He saw everything, and Eliza felt utterly exposed. A harried page boy rushed down the steps, his face slick with anxiety. He spoke in a breathless rush that broke the solemn quiet. "Lady Eliza, the prince requests your immediate return to the drawing-room. Executioner Harrington is to be your sole escort for all final movements. The prince's orders are absolute." Eliza felt the color drain from her face. To be guarded by the executioner was to be treated as a valuable prisoner. Yet she had been trained since birth to present a flawless front. She forced a polite, unwavering smile, letting none of her internal panic show. "Of course," she replied, her voice soft and perfectly modulated. Cole Harrington, without a word, fell into step beside her. His silence was heavier than any spoken threat. They ascended the main steps side by side, the graceful bride-to-be in silk and the grim, duty-bound killer. Eliza risked a glance at him. He was disciplined, stoic, and physically powerful. But beneath the discipline, she searched for a hint of the brutality everyone whispered about. She found none. His profile was carved from granite, but his jaw was not cruel. He was a force, not a monster. This man is meant to ensure I stay, she realized. But he is the only person here powerful enough to stop the prince. The drawing room was a gilded prison. Prince Julian Radcliffe stood by the hearth, clean-cut, commanding, and radiating an icy charm. He was not overtly monstrous. His cruelty was subtle, calculated, and deeply effective. The atmosphere was already thick with tension, courtesy of a minor crisis. A loyal aide, Mr. Alistair, had dared to double-check a detail on the final guest list, suggesting a politically sensitive omission. Julian turned to the trembling aide, his smile fixed. "Mr. Alistair," he began, his voice low and smooth. "Your concern for details is admirable, but your presumption to question my final review is tiresome." He did not shout. He did not touch the man. He simply held the room captive with his cold eyes. "Sir, I merely thought, regarding the Count of Pembroke—" Mr. Alistair trailed off, visibly sweating. Julian took a slow, deliberate sip of wine. "Let me educate you on the difference between a detail and an offence, Alistair. A detail is a missing fork. An offence is challenging the authority that gives you breath." He set the glass down with a soft thud. "I will not tolerate tiresome insolence, Mr. Alistair. Not from a bride, and certainly not from a clerk. You are dismissed from my service, effective immediately, and you will find that the word of Prince Julian Radcliffe extends far beyond this house. You will never find employment in any court or any respectable institution in this kingdom again. You may collect your small belongings and be gone." The aide, destroyed by this cold-blooded ruin of his career and reputation, bowed without a word, his face utterly vacant, and fled the room. Eliza watched the scene unfold from the doorway, Cole Harrington standing like a statue behind her. She felt sick. Julian had not raised his voice or his hand, yet he had executed the man's future with a casual flick of his wrist. Julian finally turned to Eliza, his fixed smile returning. "My dear Eliza, come in. My apologies for the theatrics. I merely needed to demonstrate the cost of disobedience before our wedding." His eyes slid to Cole. "Executioner Harrington, I trust Lady Eliza is proving obedient." Cole Harrington spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble, devoid of emotion. "The lady is quiet, Your Highness. Disciplined." Julian chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Excellent. I appreciate discipline, Executioner. It saves us all a great deal of trouble. She is yours until the ceremony. Ensure she remembers her duty." Eliza stepped forward, her heart a drumbeat of pure terror. As Julian extended his hand to take hers, she caught Cole Harrington's eye one last time. In the brief, charged moment, she saw something flicker in the executioner's dark gaze. It was not pity, which would have been useless, but something far more dangerous. Recognition. Cole Harrington had seen the terror in her face, and he had seen the cold, calculated destruction Prince Julian had wrought. She knew then, with a terrifying certainty, that she was promised not to a husband, but to a cage, and the man standing stoically behind her, the executioner, was the only key. The drawing-room air remained poisoned long after Mr. Alistair's departure. Eliza stood frozen as Julian's fingers closed around hers, his touch cold despite the warmth of the hearth. She could feel Cole Harrington's presence behind her, solid and unnaturally still, like a monument erected to witness her fate. "You're trembling, my dear," Julian observed, his thumb tracing a slow circle on her wrist. "Surely not from fear. We are to be married in 3 days' time. You should be accustomed to my touch by now." Eliza forced her breathing to steady, summoning the years of training that had prepared her for this very performance. "Forgive me, Your Highness. The excitement of the approaching ceremony has left me quite overwhelmed." Julian's smile never reached his eyes. "Excitement? Yes, let us call it that." He released her hand and turned to pour himself another glass of wine, the crystal decanter catching the dying light. "Executioner Harrington, step forward." Cole moved with that same disciplined grace, positioning himself where Julian could observe them both. The prince studied him with the calculating gaze of a man appraising a particularly useful tool. "Tell me, Harrington," Julian began, swirling the burgundy liquid in his glass, "what do you know of American women?" "Very little, Your Highness." Cole's voice remained flat, professional. "They are raised differently than our English roses," Julian continued, his gaze sliding to Eliza. "More spirited, some would say, prone to peculiar notions of independence. It's charming in small doses, but requires careful management." He took a sip of wine. "That is why I specifically requested you." Eliza felt her stomach turn. Requested. As if Cole Harrington were a particularly vicious guard dog to be set upon her. "Your reputation precedes you, executioner. 23 executions in service to the crown. Each one carried out with perfect efficiency, no hesitation, no mercy." Julian's smile widened. A man who understands that duty supersedes all else. "Yes, Your Highness." "Excellent. Then you understand your assignment. Lady Eliza is to remain under your direct supervision until the moment she speaks her vows. She is not to leave Ashworth Manor. She is not to receive visitors without my express permission. She is not to send or receive correspondence that has not been reviewed." Julian set down his glass with deliberate precision. "Consider her a prisoner of the highest value, one whose cooperation is essential to the crown." Eliza's fingers curled into her skirts, the silk crushing beneath her grip. She caught Cole's reflection in the mirror above the mantelpiece. His expression remained carved from stone, but she saw the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. "I understand completely, Your Highness," Cole said. Julian approached Eliza again, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. She did not flinch, though every instinct screamed at her to recoil. "3 more days, my dear. Then all this formality will be behind us, and I can begin teaching you the particular obedience required of a princess." His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Won't that be delightful?" "Of course, Your Highness." The words tasted like ash. Julian stepped back, satisfied. "Take her to her chambers, Harrington. Ensure she rests well. The final fitting is tomorrow, and I require her to look radiant." He turned his back to them, a clear dismissal. "Oh, and executioner? Remember that your duty is to the crown, not to misplaced notions of gallantry." Cole bowed slightly. "My duty has always been clear, Your Highness." They left the drawing-room in silence, Eliza leading the way through corridors that had become increasingly familiar over the past week. Cole Harrington walked exactly 3 paces behind her, close enough to prevent escape, far enough to maintain propriety. The sound of his measured footfalls on the marble floors was oddly steady, almost reassuring in its consistency. When they reached the door to her chambers, Eliza paused, her hand on the ornate handle. She turned to face him fully for the first time since their introduction. In the dimming light of the corridor, away from Julian's predatory gaze, she allowed herself to truly look at the man who would guard her cage. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps not yet 30, though the weight of his profession had carved premature lines around his eyes. Those eyes, dark, watchful, met hers without wavering. Where Julian's gaze dissected and possessed, Cole's simply observed. There was no hunger there, no cruelty, only a terrible, weary understanding. "You saw," she said quietly, the words escaping before she could stop them. "What he did to Mr. Alastair. You saw." Cole's expression did not change, but something shifted in the air between them. "I see many things, Lady Eliza. And yet you serve him." "I serve the crown." A pause, heavy with unspoken meaning. Duty and justice are not always the same creature. She searched his face, finding in those dark eyes something she had not expected from the royal executioner: integrity. It was buried deep, constrained by obligation and reputation, but unmistakably present. This man who had taken 23 lives possessed more humanity than the prince who would claim her as his bride. 3 days, she whispered, echoing her earlier countdown. Cole inclined his head slightly. "I will be outside your door, my lady, as duty requires. As duty requires." She wondered if he heard the chain in those words as clearly as she did. The morning of the second day before the wedding dawned grey and oppressive, as if the sky itself conspired to trap Eliza within Ashworth Manor's walls. She dressed in pale blue silk. Julian preferred her in soft colours, said they emphasized her delicacy, while Cole Harrington maintained his vigil outside her door. She could sense him there, a dark constant in her peripheral existence. The breakfast parlour buzzed with false warmth. Julian held court among a selection of wedding guests who had arrived early, his laughter rich and perfectly modulated. He rose when Eliza entered, Cole's shadow falling across the threshold behind her. "Ah, here is my radiant bride," Julian's voice carried across the room, drawing every eye. He crossed to her, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips with practiced tenderness. "Ladies and gentlemen, is she not a vision?" The assembled guests murmured their agreement, fans fluttering, teacups clinking. Lord Pemberton, red-faced from too much brandy despite the early hour, raised his cup. "To the happy couple, may your union strengthen the crown." Julian's arm encircled Eliza's waist, pulling her against his side. To the observers, it appeared affectionate. Only Eliza felt how his fingers pressed into her ribs, a silent warning. "My dear Eliza was just telling me yesterday how eager she is for our wedding night," he announced, his smile sharp as glass. "Weren't you, darling?" Heat flooded her cheeks. She had said no such thing, had barely spoken to him at all yesterday beyond required pleasantries. But contradiction would mean consequences. She had seen what happened to those who challenged him. "The anticipation is quite overwhelming," she managed, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Lady Thornbury tittered behind her fan. "Young love is so passionate, though I dare say, Your Highness, you must be gentle with our American rose. They are not accustomed to the intensity of royal attention." Julian's grip tightened imperceptibly. "Oh, I shall be exceedingly thorough in my attentions, Lady Thornbury. Education requires patience and a firm hand." His gaze found Eliza's. "Doesn't it, my dear?" "As you say, Your Highness." From his position by the door, Cole Harrington watched the performance with the stillness of a predator cataloguing prey. His dark eyes tracked every micro-expression, every subtle flinch Eliza couldn't quite suppress. When Julian's hand moved to the back of her neck, fingers threading through the carefully arranged curls at her nape, Cole saw her shoulders lock with tension even as her smile remained serene. The breakfast continued with similar displays, Julian's public devotion masking private dominance. He fed her a strawberry, forcing her to accept it from his fingers while the ladies cooed. He corrected her opinion on the flower arrangements, making it seem like gentle guidance while undermining every preference she expressed. Each gesture was calculated to establish ownership while maintaining the facade of romance. "Executioner Harrington," Julian called suddenly, causing several ladies to gasp at the acknowledgement of the infamous man's presence. "Do tell us, what do you make of my bride? You've been observing her quite closely." Cole stepped forward slightly, his expression unchanged. "Lady Eliza conducts herself with admirable restraint." "Your Highness." "Restraint," Julian smiled at the word choice. "How perfectly put. Restraint is indeed a virtue in a wife. Wouldn't you agree, gentlemen?" The men chuckled knowingly, while Eliza stood frozen, a beautiful ornament in Julian's collection. She felt Cole's gaze on her, but didn't dare meet it. The interminable breakfast finally ended when Julian was called away on urgent crown business. He departed with another possessive kiss to Eliza's temple, whispering against her skin, "Remember, my dear, the executioner sees everything, every gesture, every glance, every attempt at defiance." The whisper was soft enough that only she and Cole could hear it, a threat disguised as an endearment. The afternoon brought a brief respite. Eliza was permitted to walk the gardens, though Cole's presence remained constant. She moved between the rose bushes, pretending to admire blooms she couldn't truly see through the haze of her anxiety. The other guests had retreated indoors, leaving them in relative solitude. She paused at a stone bench, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. The mask she wore was becoming heavier with each passing hour. Her hands trembled as she reached for a rose, and the thorn caught her finger, drawing a bead of blood. "Damn," she whispered, then immediately glanced around, horrified at her lapse. Cole materialized beside her, producing a black handkerchief from his coat. He offered it silently, and she accepted, pressing it to the small wound. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, the first physical contact between them that wasn't orchestrated by ceremony or duty. She looked up at him then, caught off guard by his proximity. The late afternoon sun cast shadows across his severe features, and for a moment their eyes met and held. In that instant, her carefully constructed mask slipped. Cole saw everything, the naked terror she'd been concealing, the exhaustion of constant performance, the desperate wish for escape that she couldn't voice. Her eyes were wide, pleading, filled with a fear so profound it seemed to swallow light. She was drowning in front of him, silently screaming while maintaining her perfect smile. His expression shifted minutely, a softening around his eyes that anyone else would have missed. But Eliza saw it. Recognition. He knew. He understood what she couldn't say. "He sees me," she realized with stunning clarity. Not the bride, not the political pawn, but the woman terrified of what comes after I do. Cole held her gaze for another heartbeat, then stepped back, resuming his professional distance, but something fundamental had changed between them. The executioner had witnessed her truth, and instead of reporting it, he had simply acknowledged it. "The bleeding has stopped, my lady," he said quietly. She looked down at her finger, at his handkerchief stained with her blood. "Yes," she whispered. "But some wounds aren't so easily stemmed." The private dining room had been arranged with meticulous care, as if beauty could mask the horror of what was to come. Candles flickered in silver candelabras, casting dancing shadows across the damask wallpaper. The table was set for two, though Cole Harrington stood at his post near the door, present yet professionally invisible, as Julian preferred. Eliza entered wearing the emerald gown Julian had selected, its tight bodice making each breath a conscious effort. The colour, he'd said, would complement the Radcliffe emeralds she would wear as his princess. She took her seat across from him, the vast expanse of polished mahogany between them feeling simultaneously too much and not nearly enough. "You look exquisite," Julian said, pouring wine into her glass despite her subtle gesture of refusal. "That dress will serve well for tomorrow's final presentation. Though after we're married, I'll have your entire wardrobe replaced. American fashion is so unrefined." "As you wish, Your Highness." The response was automatic now, worn smooth by repetition. Julian studied her over the rim of his glass. "Tell me, Eliza, what did your mother teach you about marriage? About a wife's duties?" The question slithered across the table like a serpent. "She taught me that a good wife supports her husband's ambitions and maintains his household with grace." How quaint. Julian cut into his roasted fowl with surgical precision. "Your mother, I assume, enjoyed a certain latitude in her marriage. American women often do. They mistake their husband's indulgence for love." He looked up, his grey eyes flat as winter ice. "I do not believe in indulgence." Eliza's fingers tightened on her fork. From his position, Cole could see the micro-tremor in her hand. "Let me explain how our marriage will function," Julian continued, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "You've been quite spirited these past days, all those little glances toward windows, the way you tense when I touch you. That charming way you still think your thoughts are private." He smiled at her sharp intake of breath. "Oh yes, my dear. I notice everything." He rose from his chair, moving to stand behind hers. His hands settled on her shoulders, and Eliza went rigid. "After we're married, we'll begin what I call your reformation. It's a process I've perfected with my horses, breaking their spirit just enough that they remain beautiful, but become entirely obedient." His fingers traced along her collarbone, feeling her pulse race beneath the skin. "First, we'll eliminate your correspondence privileges permanently. No letters to America, no visitors without my presence. You'll find isolation wonderfully clarifying." Cole's jaw clenched, his body coiled with suppressed tension as Julian's words filled the room like poison gas. "Then," Julian continued, returning to his seat with casual grace, "we'll address your opinions. You have so many, don't you? Hidden beneath that careful courtesy. I can see them churning behind those pretty eyes. After a few months of correction, you'll find it easier to simply echo mine. My first wife, did you know I was married before? No. She lasted 8 months before her constitution proved too weak. But she was English, fragile. Americans are sturdier stock. You'll last longer." The word "lasted" hung in the air like a noose. Eliza's voice emerged steady despite the terror flooding her veins. "Your first wife died of fever. The records say what I tell them to say." Julian took a leisurely sip of wine. "Dr. Morrison is exceptionally talented at documentation. Nervous exhaustion, feminine hysteria, sudden fever. He has quite the repertoire. He'll be attending to your health after we're married, weekly examinations to ensure you're adjusting properly." The candles flickered, and in that wavering light, Cole saw Eliza's face transform. The mask she'd worn so carefully cracked, revealing raw, primal fear. She looked like a rabbit recognizing the wolf's teeth at its throat. "You're frightening me," she whispered. "Good." Julian's smile was genuine now, warming with satisfaction. "Fear is the beginning of wisdom, my dear, and you'll become very wise under my tutelage. I'll hollow you out like a porcelain doll, beautiful and empty, existing solely to reflect my glory. Won't that be a relief? No more difficult thoughts, no more stubborn will, just peaceful obedience." He reached across the table, capturing her hand before she could withdraw it. "Some husbands use violence to achieve this, so crude, leaving marks that gossips notice. I prefer psychological precision. By our first anniversary, you'll thank me for every cruel word, believing you deserve them. You'll beg for my attention, any attention, even if it comes with pain. And the beautiful part?" He squeezed her hand until she winced. "Everyone will see a devoted wife. No one will believe you if you tried to speak of it. Who would take the word of an hysterical American against a prince of the realm?" Cole had witnessed 23 executions. He had seen men face death with dignity and cowardice in equal measure. But watching Prince Julian Radcliffe describe the systematic destruction of Eliza's soul with the detached pleasure of a collector discussing his butterflies, this was a different kind of evil. This was death by 10,000 cuts, a murder that left the body breathing. "Now," Julian released her hand, returning to his meal. "Shall we discuss the wedding breakfast menu? I've made some changes to accommodate the Duke of Worthington's preferences." The mundane shift was deliberate, designed to destabilize. Eliza sat frozen, her untouched food congealing on her plate, forced to discuss canapes while processing her own promised annihilation. Cole met her eyes across the candlelit space. In that exchanged glance lay a terrible understanding. She was not promised to a husband, but to a torturer, and the wedding would be her funeral. The executioner had heard every word, witnessed the prince's confession of intended atrocity. His duty was to ensure she remained for this fate. But for the first time in his career of ending lives, Cole Harrington found himself contemplating how to save one. The dawn of the final day before the wedding arrived, shrouded in mist, as if nature itself sought to obscure what was to come. Eliza had not slept. She sat at her window, still dressed in yesterday's gown, watching the grounds lighten from black to grey. Cole Harrington had remained at his post all night. She could sense him through the door, a dark sentinel marking the boundary of her prison. When her lady's maid arrived with breakfast, there was something different about the tray. Beneath the silver dome covering her toast lay a small piece of parchment, folded so thin it was nearly invisible. Eliza's breath caught. She glanced toward the door, then carefully palmed the paper while lifting her teacup. The maid, young Mary, who had served at Ashworth Manor for years, kept her eyes downcast. "Will there be anything else, my lady?" "No, Mary. Thank you." When the door closed, Eliza unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. The message was brief, written in a controlled hand. Thornfield Cottage, 2 miles north, past the abandoned mill, if needed. There was no signature, but she knew. Cole had risked everything to give her this. She memorized the words before holding the paper to the candle flame, watching it curl into ash. A safe house. An option. An acknowledgement that her fear was justified and her danger real. She pressed her fingers to her lips, overwhelmed by this first act of kindness she'd experienced since arriving at Ashworth Manor. A commotion in the courtyard below drew her attention. Julian's voice carried up through her window. Sharp with irritation, she moved closer, concealed behind the heavy curtains. In the courtyard, a young stable hand, barely 16, stood before Prince Julian, his entire body trembling. At his feet lay the remnants of what had been an ornate bridle, its silver fittings now bent and muddied. "Thomas, isn't it?" Julian's voice was deceptively calm. "How long have you worked in my stables?" "3 years, Your Highness, since I was 13. The boy's voice cracked. 3 years. And in those 3 years you've been taught the value of the equipment entrusted to your care." "Yes, Your Highness. It was an accident. The horse spooked and—" "Silence!" Julian walked a slow circle around the boy, like a cat toying with wounded prey. "That bridle was a gift from the Spanish ambassador. Worth more than your family will see in a lifetime." Cole had emerged from the manor, drawn by the disturbance. He stood at the entrance, watching with that terrible stillness Eliza had come to recognize as his way of recording injustice. "I could have you arrested," Julian continued. "Destruction of royal property is a serious crime. Your parents would lose their tenant farm. Your sisters would be turned out to find work wherever they could, though pretty girls without references have limited options, don't they, Thomas?" The boy was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. "Please, Your Highness. I'll work without wages. I'll pay it back somehow." "No." Julian's smile was cold as winter frost. "You'll do something far more valuable. You'll serve as an example." He gestured to 2 guards. 20 lashes. Public. Let everyone see what happens to careless servants." He paused, savoring the boy's sob. "Oh, and Thomas? Your younger brother works in the kitchens, doesn't he? Consider his position forfeit as well. I can't have clumsy blood contaminating my household." The guards seized the boy's arms. As they dragged him toward the punishment post, Julian called out cheerfully, "Have the bridle repaired and send the bill to his family. I'm sure they'll manage somehow." Eliza's hands pressed against the window, her breath fogging the glass. This was who she would marry tomorrow. This man who destroyed a child's life over an accident, who weaponized a boy's love for his family against him. The same man who had promised to hollow her out like a doll. She looked down at Cole, still standing at the entrance. His face remained impassive, but she saw his fisted hands, the rigid line of his shoulders. He turned then, his gaze finding her window with uncanny precision. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw her own horror reflected in his dark gaze. Thornfield Cottage, 2 miles north. The first crack of the whip against Thomas's back echoed across the grounds, followed by a scream that would haunt Eliza forever. She stumbled away from the window, her decision crystallizing with each subsequent lash. She could not marry Julian Radcliffe. She would not become another casualty of his casual cruelty, another spirit for him to break. The note Cole had risked everything to give her was more than coordinates. It was permission to choose survival over duty. When the 20th lash fell, and Thomas's cries finally ceased, unconscious or worse, Eliza moved with sudden purpose. She pulled out her plainest dress, the one she'd worn for traveling. Beneath her jewelry box, she found the small amount of money her mother had insisted she hide for emergencies. Her hands were steady now, driven by desperate resolve. Tomorrow was meant to be her wedding day. Instead, it would be her escape. She would run to Thornfield Cottage, to the slim hope Cole Harrington had offered, even if it meant disgrace, even if it meant being hunted, even if it meant trusting her life to the royal executioner himself. Anything was better than becoming Prince Julian's next victim, another broken doll in his collection. Through her door she heard Cole's footsteps, heavier than usual, as if the weight of what he'd witnessed had settled into his very bones. She pressed her palm against the wood, a silent promise. "I understand. I'll run. Thank you." Tomorrow, she would bet everything on the humanity she'd glimpsed in the executioner's eyes. The night swallowed them whole the moment they crossed beyond Ashworth Manor's gates. Behind them, torches blazed to life like angry stars, illuminating the chaos they'd unleashed. Shouts echoed across the manicured grounds, Julian's voice rising above the rest, shrill with rage and disbelief, commanding his guards to bring back his property. Cole's hand gripped Eliza's wrist, pulling her forward when her elaborate gown threatened to tangle her legs. The white silk that had been meant to symbolize her surrender now glowed treacherously in the moonlight, a beacon for their pursuers. "The dress," Cole said, his voice clipped with urgency. "It's too visible." They ducked behind a stone wall bordering the eastern pasture. His hands moved to the delicate buttons at her back, 20 pearl fastenings that had taken her maid half an hour to secure. He made quick work of them with the same practiced efficiency he brought to everything, his fingers steady despite the sound of horses being readied in the distance. "Step out of it," he commanded. Eliza obeyed without hesitation, the survival instinct that had kept her composed through days of Julian's cruelty now driving her forward. She stood in her chemise and petticoats, shivering in the spring night. Cole stripped off his formal coat, black wool lined with silk, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It fell nearly to her knees, transforming her from a bride into a shadow. "The abandoned mill," she said, remembering his note, 2 miles north. "Too obvious now. They'll have read my correspondence, searched my quarters." His jaw tightened. Julian would have anticipated I might turn. He's not stupid, just cruel. Then where? Deeper, into the wild country where horses can't follow easily. He took her hand properly now, palm to palm, his grip warm and solid. "Can you run in those shoes?" She looked down at her delicate silk slippers, already muddy and torn. "I'll run barefoot if I must." Something flickered across his severe features. Approval, perhaps even admiration. "This way." They ran. The manicured grounds gave way to rougher terrain, ornamental gardens yielding to natural woodland. Eliza's lungs burned. Her corset, looser than fashion dictated but still restrictive, making each breath a struggle. Cole matched his pace to hers, constantly glancing back, calculating distances and angles like the tactical mind he was. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew more organized. Dogs began baying, hunting hounds trained to track. Julian had brought everything to bear. Cole pulled her into a stream, the cold water shocking against her bare ankles. "Walk in the water. It will confuse the dogs." They waded upstream, rocks cutting into Eliza's feet through the thin slippers. She bit back cries of pain, knowing that any sound could betray them. Cole noticed her stumbling and, without a word, swept her into his arms, carrying her while he navigated the stream bed. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "You're bleeding." "The dogs will smell it." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his arms held her carefully, as if she were something precious, rather than a fugitive he'd just condemned himself to die for. They emerged from the stream a half-mile later, Cole finally setting her down on a moss-covered bank. The sounds of pursuit had grown more distant, confused by the water trick. They had minutes at most. "Your feet," Cole said, kneeling before her. He examined the cuts with gentle fingers, then tore strips from his own shirt to bind them. The intimacy of the gesture, the royal executioner kneeling before a woman, tending her wounds, struck Eliza with unexpected force. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you do it? You've thrown away everything, your position, your honor, your life." "My honor is intact." He tied off the makeshift bandage with practiced efficiency. "I've spent 10 years serving a system that calls itself justice while protecting men like Julian Radcliffe. Tonight, I finally served actual justice. They'll execute you for this. If they catch us." He met her eyes, and in the moonlight filtering through the trees, she saw the man beneath the executioner's mask. Younger than she'd thought, marked by weariness but not hardened beyond feeling. "I've sent 23 souls to their deaths, all guilty by law. But the law and justice aren't always the same creature. Tonight, I chose to save a life instead of taking one. I'm not worth your life. That's not for you to decide." He stood, offering his hand. "Can you continue?" She took his hand, letting him pull her up. "Where are we going?" "There's a shepherd's hut in the high country, abandoned this time of year. We can reach it by dawn if we push through." He studied her face, reading her exhaustion. "It will be brutal. But I've seen your strength, Eliza. You've survived 3 days with Julian while maintaining your sanity. You can survive this." The use of her Christian name, the first time he'd spoken it, sent warmth through her chest despite the cold night air. They moved deeper into the wilderness, leaving behind the manicured world of Ashworth Manor. Cole navigated by moonlight and instinct, his knowledge of the countryside serving them well. When Eliza stumbled over roots, he steadied her. When her breathing became labored, he slowed without complaint. The feared executioner had transformed into something she'd never expected, a protector who saw her as human rather than property. Hours passed in exhausted silence, broken only by the sounds of the forest and the distant, fading calls of the search party. As false dawn began to gray the sky, Cole finally stopped. There, he pointed to a stone structure barely visible against the hillside. The shepherd's hut was small, rough, nothing like the gilded cage she'd escaped. But as Cole helped her inside, settling her on a pile of old wool blankets, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: safety. Cole stood at the doorway, keeping watch, his profile sharp against the lightening sky. This man who had been assigned to guard her imprisonment had instead chosen to become her salvation. She had bet everything on the humanity in his eyes, and he had answered by burning down his entire world to protect hers. The shepherd's hut held the silence of abandonment, broken only by Eliza's ragged breathing and the distant cry of a hawk greeting the dawn. Cole had wedged the door shut with a timber beam and checked every gap in the stone walls for sight lines before finally turning his attention back to her. She sat huddled in his coat, her bound feet drawn up beneath her, watching him with eyes that had seen too much in too few days. The white chemise beneath his coat was streaked with mud and stream water. Her carefully arranged curls had come loose, and there was a scratch across her cheek from a low-hanging branch. She looked nothing like the polished bride who had descended those stairs hours ago. She looked real. "You should rest," Cole said, remaining by the door. Even now, even here, he maintained that careful distance, the executioner's discipline still governing his movements. "I can't." Her voice was hoarse from running. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him, hear his voice telling me how he'll break me like he broke his first wife." Cole's jaw tightened. "I heard that dinner conversation. Every word. Then you know what I was running from." She pulled his coat tighter around herself. "My father arranged this marriage without asking me. He said it was my duty to the family, to our interests. The Merryweathers would secure unprecedented influence in English affairs. My younger sisters would marry into European nobility on the strength of my alliance." Her laugh was bitter. "Everyone would benefit from my sacrifice. That's what it was supposed to be. A noble sacrifice. But you learned differently. I learned I was being sold to a monster." She looked up at him, her composure finally cracking. "The first night I met Julian, he was charming, cultured, everything I'd been told to expect in a prince. But his eyes—" She shuddered. They were empty, like looking into a beautiful mask with nothing behind it. Cole moved then, crossing the small space to crouch before her, not kneeling as Julian had demanded, but lowering himself to her level. "Tell me the rest." The second week, I saw him dismiss a maid for spilling wine. She was 16, Cole. 16 and terrified, apologizing through tears. He had her thrown out without references in the middle of winter. When I asked if that wasn't harsh, he told me. Her voice broke. He told me that mercy was weakness, and he would not tolerate weakness in his household or his wife. That's when you knew. That's when I knew I was going to die. The words came out flat, exhausted truth. Maybe not physically, not right away, but everything that makes me who I am, my thoughts, my will, my soul, he was going to systematically destroy it all. And I would have let him, because I was too afraid of disappointing my family, too trained in duty and obedience to save myself. Until tonight. Until you. She reached out, her fingers brushing his where they rested on his knee. You saw me, not the alliance, not the political pawn, not the pretty American bride. You saw the woman drowning beneath the performance. Cole's hand turned, catching hers. His palm was calloused, marked by years of hard use, but his touch was impossibly gentle. I've spent 10 years watching people die, Eliza. You learn to read faces when death is involved. You see the difference between guilty men accepting their fate and innocent ones meeting unjust ends. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I saw your face in that drawing room, and I recognized an execution in progress, just slower, crueler. Why did you become an executioner? The question emerged soft but direct. How does a man with your conscience end up in that profession? He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes distant. My father was a tenant farmer on royal lands. When I was 15, the local magistrate accused him of poaching. He'd killed a rabbit to feed my sisters. We were starving that winter. The penalty was death. His voice remained steady, but Eliza saw the muscle jump in his jaw. The executioner who came was drunk, botched the job. My father took 3 blows to die. Eliza's breath caught. I swore that day that if death had to be done, it would be done with precision and honor. No one would suffer needlessly under my hand. He looked at her directly. I apprenticed, learned the trade. I've ended 23 lives, every one of them convicted by law. I told myself that made it just, that I was serving a higher purpose. His laugh was harsh. But law and justice aren't the same. I've known that for years, but I kept serving because it was all I knew how to do. Until tonight. Until tonight, he echoed. I watched Julian destroy that boy, Thomas, over a bridal. Watched him plan your psychological murder over dinner. And I realized I could no longer serve a system that calls that justice. He raised their joined hands, studying them as if surprised to find them connected. I've taken lives in duty's name, but saving yours felt like the first truly just thing I've done in a decade. You've damned yourself for me. I've saved myself through you. His free hand came up, cupping her face with devastating tenderness. You don't hide anymore, Eliza. No masks, no performances. I see the woman who chose to run, who trusted the royal executioner with her life. That's who I chose to save, the real you. She leaned into his touch, tears finally spilling over. I'm terrified. Julian won't stop hunting us. We have no money, no plan, nowhere to go. We have each other. He wiped her tears with his thumb. And I promise you, On my life and what's left of my honor, he will never touch you again." The dawn light filtered through the gaps in the stone, painting them in shades of gold and shadow. In this abandoned hut, stripped of titles and pretense, they were simply two people who had chosen each other over everything the world demanded of them. Eliza's hand came up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. "What happens now?" "Now we survive. Together." She nodded, exhaustion and relief warring in her expression. When she finally closed her eyes, leaning against his shoulder, Cole held her carefully. This woman he'd betrayed a kingdom to protect, this unexpected redemption wrapped in muddy silk and borrowed wool. Outside, the hunt continued. But inside the shepherd's hut, two fugitives found what neither had expected: truth, sanctuary, and the beginning of something worth the cost of treason. They had perhaps 3 hours of peace before the world came for them. Eliza woke to find Cole standing rigid at the window gap, his entire body coiled with tension. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning off the mist, and in that cruel clarity she saw what had frozen him: dust rising on the road below, the unmistakable column of mounted soldiers moving with purpose toward the highlands. "How many?" Her voice was steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. 20. Maybe more." He didn't turn from the window. "They're moving in a search pattern, systematic. Julian's not leaving this to chance." Eliza rose, Cole's coat falling from her shoulders as she moved to stand beside him. The royal guard was perhaps 2 miles distant but closing. They wore the prince's colors, crimson and gold, visible even at this distance. At the column's head rode a figure she recognized even from here, Julian himself sitting his horse with rigid fury. He came personally. She shouldn't have been surprised. Julian wouldn't delegate his vengeance. "He wants to watch." Cole's voice was flat, already calculating angles and outcomes with the tactical mind that had kept him alive through a decade of dangerous work. "There's a ravine to the west, steep but navigable for someone light and quick. You could reach it before they spot you, follow it down to the river valley." "No." "Eliza, listen to me." "No." She turned to face him fully, her chin raised with the same defiance that had made her descend those stairs last night rather than collapse. "I won't run while you die for me. That's exactly what you'll do." He gripped her shoulders, his intensity almost frightening. "I knew the cost when I took you from that hall. I made my choice, but you still have a chance." "To what?" "Survive alone while the man who saved me faces execution." She pulled away from his grip, her eyes blazing. "You think I could live with that? You think I want to spend the rest of my life knowing I let you sacrifice everything while I ran like a coward?" "It's not cowardice. It's survival. It's abandonment." Her voice cracked. "I've spent my entire life doing what others demanded, being the dutiful daughter, the compliant bride, the perfect political pawn. Last night, for the first time, I chose something for myself. I chose you, Cole. I chose this, whatever this is, and I won't unmake that choice just because it's hard." Cole stared at her, something raw and unguarded crossing his features. "You don't understand what they'll do to you if they take you back." "I understand perfectly. Julian will make an example of me. He'll parade my disobedience, punish my defiance, break me exactly as he promised." She moved closer, her hand finding his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palm. "But at least I'll have had this. One night of freedom, one morning of truth, one moment of choosing my own fate. Eliza, if we run separately, we both die alone. If we stand together, at least we face it as we chose to live, free." Her voice softened. "Please don't ask me to leave you. I've already lost everything else. Don't make me lose the one thing I chose." Outside, a horn sounded. the guards signaling to each other, tightening their net. The sound galvanized Cole into motion. He crossed to the corner where he'd stashed his ceremonial sword, the blade that had ended 23 lives in service to a crown he'd betrayed. He drew it, testing its weight, his expression settling into grim resolve. "Then we make our stand here," he said quietly. "But I need you to understand. I won't let them take you alive. If it comes to that, if there's no other way." He couldn't finish the sentence, but she understood. Death before capture, mercy before Julian's vengeance. "I trust you." She said it simply, meaning it absolutely. Cole pulled her close then, his forehead resting against hers in a gesture more intimate than any kiss. "I'm sorry I couldn't give you more than this. A few hours in a shepherd's hut, a running battle through the countryside. You gave me myself back." Her hands framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "In 3 days, you saw me more clearly than anyone in my entire life. You valued my soul over your duty. That's not nothing, Cole. That's everything." The sound of horses grew louder, accompanied now by voices. Julian's guards calling to each other as they converged on the hut. They'd been found. Cole positioned himself at the door, sword ready, his body a living barrier between Eliza and what was coming. She stood behind him, not cowering, but present, a witness to his last stand. If these were their final moments, they would face them as they'd chosen to live. Together, defiant, free. The door shuddered under a heavy blow. Then another. "Cole Harrington!" Julian's voice carried through the wood, sharp with triumphant rage. "You're surrounded. 20 men, all loyal to the crown. Surrender the woman and I'll make your death quick. Continue this foolishness and I'll ensure you both suffer for days." Cole's grip tightened on his sword. He glanced back at Eliza one last time, and she saw in his dark eyes every word he couldn't say, apology and devotion, regret and resolve. "I don't surrender to tyrants," Cole called back. "Then you'll die as a traitor." "I'll die as a free man. That's more than you'll ever be, Julian." The door exploded inward, under a battering ram, splintering into fragments. Guards poured through the opening, swords drawn, but Cole met them like a force of nature. His blade sang in the morning light, driving back the first wave with brutal efficiency. The shepherd's hut became a crucible of violence, the executioner using every skill that had made him feared across the realm, not to serve death, but to protect life. Eliza pressed against the far wall, watching the man she'd chosen fight impossible odds for one more moment of their brief, brilliant freedom. This was their reckoning. This was their choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Cole's blade cut through the first guard's sword arm with surgical precision, sending the man stumbling back with a scream. The second guard lunged, but Cole sidestepped, using the confined space to his advantage. These men were trained for open combat, not close-quarters brutality. 2 more fell back, bleeding from shallow cuts designed to disable rather than kill. But there were too many. For every guard Cole drove back, 2 more pressed forward. His breathing grew labored, his movements fractionally slower. A blade grazed his shoulder, drawing blood that darkened his torn shirt. Eliza watched the mathematics of his death play out with horrible clarity. He was magnificent, but he was mortal. In minutes, perhaps seconds, they would overwhelm him through sheer numbers. Then Julian would step through that shattered door and reclaim his property. Her eyes swept the small hut, desperate for anything useful. The shepherd's abandoned tools, the pile of wool blankets, the small hearth with the oil lamp. She grabbed it, her hands steady despite her racing heart. The lamp was old, clay and brass, half full of oil that sloshed as she lifted it. Outside, she could hear Julian's voice barking orders, growing impatient with his guard's failure to subdue one man. "Cole!" she shouted. "Down!" Years of trusting his instincts made him drop without question, rolling left as Eliza hurled the lamp at the doorway. It shattered against the frame, oil spraying across the wooden lintel, and the guards pressed in the opening. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Cole's fallen torch, knocked aside in the fighting, touched the spreading oil. Fire bloomed with terrifying speed, racing up the doorframe and across the oil-soaked threshold. The guards scrambled backward, shouting in alarm as flames created a temporary barrier. The dry wood of the ancient hut caught immediately, smoke beginning to fill the cramped space. "The back wall!" Eliza coughed, pointing to where the stones had crumbled, leaving a gap barely wide enough for a person. "It leads to the ravine." Cole grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the opening as fire spread across the ceiling. Behind them, guards were already organizing, some beating at the flames while others circled to cut off their escape. They squeezed through the gap, stones scraping their skin, emerging onto the steep hillside behind the hut. The ravine Cole had mentioned earlier cut deep into the landscape below them, its sides too steep for horses. It was suicidal to attempt without rope or proper equipment. It was their only chance. "Can you climb?" Cole asked, already knowing her answer. "I can do anything that isn't marrying Julian Radcliffe." They descended in controlled falls, grabbing at roots and rocky outcroppings, feet sliding on loose scree. Behind them, Julian's voice rose in fury as he realized his prey was escaping again. Crossbow bolts began to rain down, clattering against stones, one passing close enough to tear through Eliza's borrowed coat. Halfway down, Cole's foot slipped on wet stone. He fell hard, tumbling, and would have plummeted the remaining distance if Eliza hadn't grabbed his wrist with both hands. Her slight weight anchored against a jutting rock, arms screaming with strain as she held him suspended over the drop. "Let go," he gasped. "You can't hold me." "I didn't run from a prince to lose you to a ravine," she gritted out, muscles trembling. "Swing your leg. There's a ledge." He found it, taking his weight off her burning arms. They clung there together, pressed against the cliff face, as guards appeared at the ravine's edge above. But none attempted to follow. The descent was too treacherous, the risk too great. Julian's face appeared, purple with rage. "You think you've won? There's nowhere in England you can hide, nowhere in the world I won't find you." Cole looked up at the prince, then did something that would haunt Julian's nightmares. He smiled. "Then I suppose we'll give you quite the chase, Your Highness." He kissed Eliza then, fierce and claiming, pressed against a cliff face while the man who'd tried to own her screamed impotent threats from above. When they broke apart, both were grinning like feral things. "Can you reach the bottom?" Cole asked. "With you? Anywhere." They descended the rest of the ravine more carefully, reaching the rocky stream bed as Julian's forces began the long ride around to cut them off. But Cole knew this country, knew the paths that didn't appear on maps. He led Eliza through a crack in the ravine wall that opened into a network of caves, through passages barely wide enough for their bodies, emerging finally into a hidden valley on the far side of the highlands. A farmer's cart sat unattended near a small cottage, its owner inside having lunch. Cole and Eliza borrowed it without asking, Cole driving the old horse at a steady pace that wouldn't attract attention. By the time Julian's forces reached the valley, they were already miles away, just another couple traveling the roads. 3 weeks later, having traded the cart for passage and used Eliza's hidden money sparingly, They stood on the deck of a merchant ship bound for France. Behind them, England receded into mist. Ahead lay the continent, vast and full of places where Julian's authority held no weight. Eliza leaned against the rail, Cole's arm around her waist, both of them wearing the rough clothes of common travelers. Her family would have disowned her by now. Cole was declared traitor and outlaw throughout the kingdom. They had almost nothing, a few coins, the clothes they wore, and a price on both their heads. "Regrets?" Cole asked softly. She turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. The woman who had stood frozen on those stairs, about to kneel before a monster, was gone. In her place stood someone forged in fire and flight, still gentle, still herself, but unbreakable now. "Only that I didn't throw that lamp sooner." She kissed him, tasting salt air and freedom. "Where do we go?" "Everywhere Julian isn't. Paris, Vienna, Rome. We'll move like ghosts, work where we can, disappear when we must." His hand cupped her face. "It won't be the life you were raised for." "Good." That life was a beautiful cage. She smiled, fierce and genuine. "This is better. Dangerous, uncertain, impossible, and completely ours." The ship's bell rang, marking the hour. Behind them, the royal guard would still be searching. Julian's rage would pursue them across borders and years. They would spend their lives looking over their shoulders, running from a prince's wounded pride. But they would run together. They would love in defiance of duty. They would live free, even if freedom meant being forever hunted. Cole pulled her close as England disappeared into the horizon. The royal executioner and the runaway bride bound by treason and trust, sailing toward a life that would be brief or long, easy or hard, but undeniably, defiantly theirs. The prince had wanted to break her spirit. Instead, she and the executioner had broken his pride and escaped with their souls intact. That, Eliza thought as Cole's lips found hers again, was the truest justice of all. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.